Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are continuing our series on unemployment and the labor market. In the last video, we did some calculations and explained why it's not usually just sufficient to look at only the unemployment rate. We also want to be looking at the labor force participation rate, the unemployment population ratio. The other thing that we could be looking at is those same statistics, but for the prime-aged population, ages 25 to 54. There's also this idea of underemployment, which is people who are technically employed. They were working for work in the last week for pay, but maybe they were just part-time employed and they wanted to be full-time employed. So that's one other way to look at labor market health: underemployment, part-time but wanting full-time. Anyway, in this next new video, we're going to be looking at trends in unemployment and kind of cyclical relationships over time, cyclical unemployment, frictional unemployment, natural rate of unemployment, and some concepts like that. So let's go ahead and dive in here. We're going to talk about cyclical unemployment here, but in general, there are a lot of statistics that are either cyclical or acyclical or countercyclical. And so essentially anything that is cyclical is a statistical relationship that moves together with GDP. And we'll talk about examples here in a second. Countercyclical moves opposite to GDP. That would include unemployment. And then acyclical is no relationship or unrelated to GDP. So if we look here, we have GDP in red and we have unemployment in blue. And it's a little messy to see because we're looking at, that looks like probably maybe quarterly GDP with a lot of spikes. But in general, remember, these gray bars are recessions. And as you can see, during the recessions, there tends to be decreases in GDP. And at the same time, during those recessions, we see increased unemployment. Okay, and then vice versa during the recovery periods. So because unemployment moves opposite to GDP, we think of unemployment as countercyclical. And in these cycles of we just have natural cycles of unemployment as it moves along with the economy. So kind of a strange change of words, but basically even though it's a countercyclical relationship, we call this cyclical unemployment. Just because unemployment moves in cycles, they just happen to be countercyclical cycles. And this is how we basically describe fluctuations in unemployment in the short term or the short run. Okay, so in the short run, we expect unemployment to move up and down with the economy, the economic cycles, cyclical unemployment. Okay, couple other concepts here. Well, actually, yeah. But just to, so we have, yeah, so cyclical relationship moves in the same cycle. If something has a cyclical relationship with GDP, then when GDP increases, the variable of interest also increases. So if GDP goes up, wages typically go up. So wages have a cyclical relationship with GDP. Something like unemployment, particularly short-run unemployment, has a countercyclical relationship with GDP. And let's do a couple more examples there. So maybe even pause the video, try to think about some different things that may be cyclical or countercyclical. But let's start with cyclical. So wages, like I said, when GDP is going up, national income that means our personal incomes are likely going up as well. So wages, investments, home purchases, in general, a lot of purchases of things, vacations. When the economy is doing well, people spend more money on these sorts of things. So these are cyclical relationships, moving with GDP. Okay, countercyclical moves opposite of GDP. So something like defaults on loans, right? If the economy is doing poorly, then more people are going to default on their loans or have late payments, for example. Another example would be inferior goods, like ramen noodles is a common example. So when the economy is doing bad, incomes are going down, purchasing of ramen noodles goes up, right? That's a countercyclical relationship. Another interesting one that holds up in the data typically are university enrollments. So when the economy is doing poorly, GDP is going down, there are fewer job opportunities. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to school. So you go to college, or if you're graduating college, you go to grad school. And so actually university enrollments have a countercyclical relationship to GDP. When the economy does well, fewer people go to college because they have more job opportunities and vice versa. And then another example, or a last kind of category of examples, are acyclical relationships. So GDP goes up, GDP goes down, up, down, so on and so forth. But some things, they just have no relationship to GDP. So healthcare spending. So if this one is GDP, this one might be healthcare spending. Because when people need healthcare, they need healthcare. It doesn't really matter if the economy is doing well or not. Generally, and there could be like a little relationship there. But if there's not a strong relationship, then it's considered acyclical. So generally healthcare, but also other necessities, right? Food as a broad category. Restaurant spending might be cyclical. So when the economy does well, you go out to eat more often. But food as a general category, you're going to need food all the time. As a very like kind of silly but example to provide the idea are days in a year, right? Doesn't matter how well GDP is doing, there are going to be 365 days in a year, plus a leap year every once in a while. But that's an idea there. Necessity, things that are addictive. Just because if you can't control it, then it doesn't matter if the economy is doing well or poorly. If you're addicted to some type of drug or even like something like coffee, right? You're going to have coffee whether the economy is doing well or whether it's not. But again, maybe it's not going to be coming from Starbucks. Maybe you'll make it yourself, right? Cigarettes, same idea. So ultimately, what this comes down to are things that have highly inelastic demand, which is essentially meaning whether the price is going up or down, or whether whatever's happening in the economy, the demand for that is going to stay the same. Okay. And so that's kind of explaining the short-term fluctuations, because we have short-term cycles in the economy, but we can kind of think of some longer run natural frictional structural unemployments. So in the graph above, and so that graph was quite far above, but basically we have the economy, when it's doing bad, unemployment is going up. When it's doing well, unemployment is going down, and vice versa. And this is this is our cyclical short-term unemployment. But in general, unemployment is going to still kind of cycle around some sort of long-run trend. And that long-run trend is the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so a couple things here about natural rate of unemployment. This is the lowest unemployment rate tolerable without pushing up inflation. The lowest unemployment rate tolerable without pushing up inflation. Okay, and the idea here is that, all right, if the unemployment rate starts going down, let's do this over here. The unemployment rate goes down, and if it continues to go down, it gets very low, all of a sudden, everybody who's looking for a job has a job. How are employers going to attract new workers? At some point, they have to increase wages. And if you increase wages, that means people's incomes are going up. That means prices across the economy are going to go up. And when the price level rises, that just means we have inflation. So actually, if the unemployment rate gets too low, there's upward pressure on prices. And so there's a balance there that we need to strike. And that's one of the things that the Federal Reserve, which we're going to be talking about in the next lecture series, the Federal Reserve is kind of trying to keep this balance between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. Okay, so that's the natural rate of unemployment, the lowest rate tolerable without pushing up inflation. And this is not directly observable because we only observe we only observe the current unemployment rate at any given point in time. So it's not directly observable, and it's hard to estimate. But most estimates for the U.S. are around 4.5 to 5.5%. Okay, although I will say a lot of economists were essentially proven wrong during the decade of the 2010s because we kept seeing that lower and lower unemployment rate, and it got as low as 3.5%, and we still didn't have upward pressure on inflation. So that's been a bit of an anomaly in kind of the last several decades or more within economics, where we had very low levels of unemployment, but also not high inflation. And so that's going to be an interesting thing to watch and see as as we recover from COVID-19 and enter into a period of recovery as our unemployment rate ticks back down. So again, another video specifically on the current unemployment situation, labor market situation, coming later. Okay, that's natural rate of unemployment. Frictional unemployment. So frictional unemployment is an aspect of unemployment which leaves us not expecting the unemployment rate ever to be zero. And that's because this is unemployment which is to be expected. And why might we expect unemployment? It's simply because people retire, they quit, they want to change jobs. We have new people coming out of high school or coming out of college looking for a job. And so just kind of, I shouldn't say naturally, but just through the normal course of economic interactions, we're going to expect there to be some unemployment. So this is unemployment that occurs as workers move between jobs through job transitions or retirement. So unemployment that occurs as workers move between jobs through job transitions or retirement. Or, also coming straight out of school. And because of this is why we don't expect 0% unemployment ever. This is why we don't expect to ever have 0% unemployment. Okay, and then finally we have structural unemployment, which is a bigger problem in society when we have unemployment that occurs because individuals lack the skills desired by employers. Because individuals lack the skills desired by employers. Okay, this is a more serious problem. This often comes from technological change, right? Throughout the 90s, for example, we had drastic changes in what employers needed through the kind of personal computing and internet revolutions. And it just simply takes time for people to acquire the skills, especially in a rapidly changing economic environment. So structural unemployment, if it's not addressed and if people don't acquire those skills, then we have a much more serious problem, a much longer term problem than something like, say, frictional unemployment. Okay? All right. And so, I think that'll do it for this video. And then we'll have one more to round off this set of lecture notes. And in that, we're going to look at a couple policies briefly and a couple statistics just to show how unemployment rates and earnings differ among different levels of education. Much shorter video for the last one, but I'm going to go ahead and stop it here, pick it up in the next one, and I will see you there. Thanks.